Hello, everyone. This is Pam Moore, Director of the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program. I'm also part of the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee, and I'm here to introduce Legal Wellbeing in Action, a podcast series offered by the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee. Last year was the first full year of the Wellbeing Committee at work. In identifying ways to bring well-being education and initiatives to the New Mexico legal community, we created a 2021 campaign called What a Healthy Lawyer Looks Like. 2021 is dedicated to educating the New Mexico legal community on a variety of well-being topics that pertain to work and home life. Our goal is that every judge, lawyer, law student, and legal staff person can find some aspect of their mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual health to improve upon. We strive to educate, encourage, and support the New Mexico legal community to show up as their best self in all aspects of life, which means we will be covering a wide variety of topics that relate to the whole human self. Thank you for being here today listening to Legal Wellbeing in Action.
Hello everyone, Tanessa Akins here. Welcome to Legal Wellbeing in Action. Today's episode will revolve around the well-being of law students. With us today in this discussion is Annie Swift, a second-year law student at the University of New Mexico, and Dr. Katie Young, a professor of sociology at UM Amherst, and the author of her book, How to Be Sort of Happy in Law School. We hope you enjoy.
All right, thank you, Pam and Tanessa, for that introduction. My name is Annie Swift, and I'll be your host for this episode of Legal Wellbeing in Action. I am a second-year student at the University of New Mexico School of Law and the student representative for the New Mexico State Bar Wellbeing Committee. I'm here with Katie Young, PhD, JD, and professor of sociology at UM Amherst. I met Katie about a year ago when she came to UNM to present on her book, How to Be Sort of Happy in Law School. It was a particularly memorable encounter because it was the last meeting on campus before we went into lockdown. And it was also a wonderful introduction to her research and the book, which has been a great guide for me throughout law school, both in terms of academic advice and personal advice. Katie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thanks for the kind words about the book. That means a lot to me. As you know, I got a chance to visit UNM Law School last year. It was actually my very last pre-pandemic trip, and I absolutely loved it. UNM is a really special place, and I found the students and faculty so welcoming, even as we were literally going into lockdown during my visit. So a little about me, I do have a JD and PhD, both from Stanford, and I now teach in the sociology department at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, where I teach courses on policing, surveillance, and social psychology. I love being in a sociology department, but I missed law school enough that I'm actually going to teach evidence at Western New England Law School this year, really just for fun and because
Nice.
I love evidence. I just love evidence. And if you don't agree that evidence is super fun, you have not taken my evidence class. We have a good time.
There you have it.
In addition to studying legal ed, my other research looks at criminal justice processes, so especially parole hearings, and at legal consciousness, which is the beliefs and attitudes people have about the law and how those beliefs lead them to act. My latest project is on access to civil justice. So really like trying to figure out how we can get better solutions for all the people out there who have civil justice problems and don't even necessarily know they have legal problems. Anyhow, I'm very happy to be on the podcast. So thanks for inviting me.
Excellent. We're so happy to have you. So let's dive right in. Obviously, as a law student, I think quite often about what it means to be happy in law school. And, you know, to be honest, I look around and I know maybe one person, one colleague who is genuinely very happy to be in law school. I know maybe one attorney who claims to have just loved the experience. And otherwise, you know, across the board, I hear people say that it's tough. And, you know, for me, it has been overwhelming at times. It can be really stressful, lots of pressure. But of course, there are also parts that I enjoy. For you, what does it mean to be sort of happy in law school? What motivated you to write this book?
Yeah, well, law school is tough. I mean, I find that what surprises law students the most, though, isn't that law school is tough, but the ways it is tough. So the ways that stress and pressure manifest, and the ways that the very structure of law school can cause a lot of self-doubt and a lot of angst. And maybe we can get more into later in our discussion exactly why this might be so. But to answer your question, I wrote the book because I realized that, well, there are a lot of books out there that talk about how to make law review or how to get a law firm job. There's not a lot about how to figure out whether those are even things you really want, right? There's not a lot telling you about whether feeling like you're back in high school is normal, right? So I wanted to write the book I wish I could have read while I was in law school. And I felt like I was well suited to write it because of my kind of weird and unusual path through law school. I started out as a typical 1L. I entered law school because I wanted to become a public defender. And then later in law school, I started a PhD in sociology. And because I did the 2 degrees at the same time, I was actually around the law school for a total of something like 8 years. And I started to see social patterns. I started to see waves of students come in and out, fight certain battles, get certain jobs, fall in and out of love with each other. I started as a student, but I was also an RA, a TA. Eventually, I co-taught a class there. I knew everyone from custodians to librarians to faculty members, and just knowing one institution from so many angles got me really interested in law school as a social phenomenon. And then as an empirical researcher, I realized I wanted to study law school more systematically. So I designed a study to see what the patterns were like out there on a broader scale. And those data are really at the core of the book.
Wonderful. There's a section in your book that starts to talk a lot about imposter syndrome, and it's a term that I really hadn't been familiar with prior to law school, and now I hear it all the time. I remember talking to a professor about it during my first year, kind of asking what she thought about it, how to cope with the feeling, and she basically responded, "That's not real. You need to not buy into that and just push forward." I mentioned something about feeling a little bit like an imposter during my first summer clerkship after 1L, and my supervisor kind of laughed and said, "Just wait till you're an associate and then you'll really know what it feels like." And since that time, I've heard a lot of, attorneys with 30 plus years of experience still feeling like imposters. And I'm wondering what you can tell us about imposter syndrome. I know it's not necessarily on the DSM, but why are law students and lawyers so prone to it? What can we do?
Yeah. So imposter syndrome, you're right, it's not in the DSM. It's really not, I mean, it's not a diagnosable like mental condition or something. It's more like a constellation of thought patterns. Kind of the persistent sense that you aren't really equipped to be wherever you are, that you're always kind of half faking it. So how does that show up in law school? So for example, let's say you make law review. What you think if you have imposter syndrome is, well, probably law review wasn't very competitive this year. Let's say you don't make law review. Well, in that case, someone with imposter syndrome thinks, see, I'm really not good enough to be here. So imposter syndrome thinking really means that you attribute your successes to flukes or lack of competition. But when you fail, you interpret it as evidence of a lack of ability or a lack of intelligence. So it's kind of the tendency to over-internalize failure, seeing it as evidence of who you quote unquote really are, at the same time, under-internalizing success and not seeing it as evidence of who you really are. But you asked what we can do about it. So I'll just give you my top strategies. Oh, and I should also say that, plenty of men also have imposter syndrome, but that imposter syndrome has been found to be especially common among high achieving women. And then we have this weird cycle, right, where imposters work really hard to hide their supposed inadequacy, and then they're successful from working so hard, so it raises the bar, and then they have even more fake successes that they feel like they have to cover for. Does this sound familiar at all?
Sure.
But so my top strategies are these. So let's see. So for one, I think just understanding that you're learning a new skill set, and this is true for practicing lawyers too, who are maybe leaping to a different area of practice or trying something new, working with a different kind of client. Understand that you're learning a new skill set and you don't yet have the tools to tackle every question. right? This is something related to what Carol Dweck, who's a psychologist, calls a growth mindset, right? Your inability to parse contracts instantly does not make you stupid, in the same way that you would not call a first grader stupid because he doesn't know how to do long division yet, right? He just doesn't know how to do it yet. He'll get there. Same with you. Another strategy for coping with imposter syndrome is to think about how you'd interpret a friend's experience of a success or of a failure. Like if your friend got on law review, you would probably think, oh, you rock. You would not think, must have been pretty easy to get on law review, right? Right? Unless you're like not a very good friend. You know, kind of related to this, or maybe not, I think concentrating on other people more can be really useful. I give one quote in the book from C.S. Lewis, who said, true humility isn't thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. So focusing
yes.
so focusing on like external projects, putting together a conference, working at a clinic, outside things distract you from assessing yourself. And then you're not really, you know, it's much more difficult to focus on the ways that you feel like an imposter. And then,
That makes sense.
yeah, I mean, you know, and I should say that, you know, not all of these strategies will work for everyone. But I think that at least one of them will work for most people. You know, another good thing to remember is that you don't know about anyone else's failures, right? You only know about their successes. And even people who we think about heroes have so many disappointments and rejections behind them. As I was writing the book, I was looking for an example of this. And I learned that Justice Sotomayor got no offered at Paul Weiss when she was a law student. Like they were literally like, oh, I don't know, you shouldn't come back after your first summer here. Well, it appears not to have impeded her too much. So I think that's really helpful. But of course, that's not what you think of when you think of Justice Sotomayor. You don't think, oh, she got no offered. No, you think she's amazing, right? And the last kind of strategy that I'll mention is one that seems like it would be useless, or at least when I first heard it, I thought it was going to be useless, and it's actually ended up being the thing that works the best for me, which is acknowledging that you feel like a fraud and then moving on, right? You can say, well, I'm definitely going to bomb Fed courts, but I'm going to study hard for the final anyway. And be like, I have no business being on law review, and yet here I am. So here I go. You know, feeling like an imposter doesn't mean you have to act like one.
Sure. In that regard, yeah, we can keep moving and keep trying. So I appreciate your input on that one.
Sure.
Another one of my favorite passages from the book, and I think this touches on something similar, comes in a section that you call the law school state of mind, and you talk about, quote unquote, building your wings. Can you tell us what you mean by building your wings?
Yeah, sure. So that part of the book comes from a quote by someone named Kobe Yamada, and he writes, sometimes you have to take a leap and build your wings on the way down. You know, if there's one trait that seems to unite all law students, it's risk aversion. I would say, for some people, the sense of risk aversion of playing it safe is even one of the things that brought them to law school, right? I'll be on the safe side, feeling like you have to constantly keep all your options open, right? To me, law students and maybe lawyers could do with a little more wing building, a little more trying hard things. Confidence can definitely come from success, but I find that even more than coming from success, confidence can come from doing or finishing something you thought would be too hard for you to try in the first place. You know, if there's a professor that you like, but you find really intimidating, go to her office hours, apply to work as her RA. Don't take yourself out of the running, put yourself into the running when you think you have no business being there. You know, don't think about whether you'll be good at, say, something like moot court. If it's something you want to try, sign up. Figure it out when you get in. It's not that you'll end up being wonderful, but being wonderful is not the goal, right? You're doing something so hard that simply not giving up counts as a success. I think that's how you build wings. And this might be really hard if you're used to being the best at everything you do. But being the best at everything you do is not, I would argue, a sign that someone is brilliant. It's a sign that maybe they're not challenging themselves enough.
Mm-hmm. And do you think this plays into being a lawyer as well? Are there ways that lawyers can benefit from building their wings?
I mean, I think so. I think that's true of maybe any professional, right? I mean, I think that there are times in all of our careers where we start to feel somewhere between a little comfortable and a little stuck. And I think that, realizing that your career comes in seasons. There are seasons when it's okay to feel comfortable and stuck. And there are seasons when that isn't comfortable and you feel like you do need to push yourself more. So maybe it's, taking on some kind of pro bono work. Maybe it's trying out a new practice area. Maybe it's doing, an in-person appellate argument for the first time. But I think it can become even harder to leap into something new when you're kind of established in your field, right? You're already kind of good. And so to leap into something new where others might not recognize you as good, I think can be scary. So I think, one trick is to not let yourself get into that mindset.
The easier said than done, but
Indeed,
it's
indeed,
good.
Definitely true. Well, and and I think sometimes starting something that you're not going to be good at. So I wanted to build this capacity in myself. So I'll give you a personal anecdote. Really wanted to build this capacity in myself for trying something new, right? So I was hired 5 years ago as a professor at the University of Massachusetts, and it's a good job. I was excited about it. At the same time, I felt like many times I had this sense like I have to be perfect at everything I do. I have to, I really have to be polished. I have to be, no one in my family had gone to grad school. So it felt like a big deal for me. I felt like I really had to figure this out. And so to get the sense, to kind of dispel that sense of perfection, I decided to start a totally new hobby for me. So this is going to sound like it doesn't relate, but it does. I started pottery. So pottery is something I'd never tried before. And, the kind of end result of me doing pottery for a few years until the pandemic hit was not that I became really good at pottery. In fact, I never did, and I probably never will, but that's okay. Like for me, the challenge was to get myself to try something that I knew I would suck at. And that was okay. And that I was going to try to get better little by little. And so I think that one way to dislodge yourself from this kind of like safe, got to be an expert all the time, got to succeed all the time thinking is to try something unrelated to your work. And it will kind of dislodge you from this way of thinking. I actually find that trying something that I didn't care if I was good at or not, in my case, pottery, really did extend into my work and really did make me feel like it was okay to be a little more experimental and a little, frankly, to fail a little bit more.
That's amazing. I remember taking pottery in high school and not being any good at it all, but just loving it. Maybe I'll dig back into that.
Highly recommended. I have many like 2-pound, really small, badly formed, like pots / ashtrays to, as trophies of my happy failures.
Yeah, we had one assignment that was make a shoe, and I made a rain boot. It's still sitting on my dad's shelf, but yeah, no good. Yeah, so one of the things that I wasn't expecting about law school, though, was kind of all the existential questions that were coming up for me. I mean, really, I was asking myself, and I continue to, who am I in this experience? Why am I doing this? What do I need to disclose about myself in certain circumstances? What is my identity in many ways as an attorney, as a law student, as a person? And I've also been realizing that my identity allows me to experience law school in a way that's really different from a lot of my colleagues. And I know that your book goes into, how race and class and gender and sexual orientation play into the law school experience. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and also how that affects our lives as we become attorneys after law school.
The Solutions Group, the State Bar of New Mexico's EAP provider, offers confidential and free professional counselors to support employees and their direct family members by offering short-term counseling, assessment, and referrals for any life struggle. This includes drug addiction, relationship conflict, anxiety, depression, and grief and loss. Other services include dependent care, crisis assessment, intervention, and educational presentations, free well-being webinars, and an online stress assessment tool. Call 505-254-3555 or 1-866-254-3555 and then identify with NMJ Lab to schedule an appointment or video visit.
So this is a big question, and it's actually something I've been thinking about a lot because I'm currently doing in the process of doing a new study, and the new study tracks about 50 law students from about 30 different law schools and interviews them once before law school and then 4 more times over their 1L year.
Awesome.
So we're talking like, 250 interviews, like tons of law students, and it's just been fascinating to get this really in-depth look at 1L year. It's been frustrating to me because a lot of times we act like, oh, law school is hard for everyone, or, oh, there's an equal playing field, no one knows what they're doing. But to be honest, this simply isn't true. People whose parents are lawyers have a tremendous head start just in terms of understanding basic things about how law school works. People from higher class brackets can, afford supplements, afford new computers, and frankly are insulated from certain kinds of difficulties that really end up being setbacks that other students feel like they have to hide. Non-white students experience all manner of microaggressions. And one thing that these interviews have really taught me is that we need to teach law students to think effectively about their own identities, but also how to think effectively about other people's identities, including their peers. I think cognitive empathy could be part of the curriculum. Empathy helps students.
That would be amazing.
It would. I would love that. It would serve them well in legal practice too, right? In working with clients
Definitely.
and co-counsel. And in some law schools, this is taught, but it's often optional or it's considered a soft skill. I think we need to raise the status of things like empathy, things like, frankly, legal consciousness, how everyday people think about law, and take those things like that seriously as part of thinking like a lawyer. And I think that also, we're doing increasingly a better job of letting people know that they need to be allies, but I think that people don't always know how to be allies. If you're a male law student and you want to be an ally to women, what does that look like? If you're a white student, literally, what do you do when you witness a microaggression? I think we need to teach people that because these things we know from after the JD and other studies, we know that this follows people into practice. And I think, one thing that I also think that we could teach students is that, yes, in some ways, whatever identities you come to law school with, whatever intersectionalities you exist at, they may feel like weaknesses sometimes, but I think we need to teach students to recognize the ways in which they are also strengths, really big strengths, whether it's your, an experience that allows you to relate to clients better or see a problem in a different way or see a problem more creatively. One thing that I learned really quickly in law school was, I was really nervous talking to professors, but I wasn't very nervous talking to clients because they talked a lot like the people I grew up with, right? And I found that some of my classmates actually had a little bit of trouble relating to people. Not all of them, obviously, but some did. And I thought, oh, I see, like the ways that I understand the world, or like having held certain kinds of jobs myself, made me see and understand things in ways that I was like, oh, I get it. Like, that's not just a weakness, it's also a superpower.
That's really good advice. Yeah, thank you. Another question I had, kind of into the nitty gritty of law school, is in recognizing that law school can be bad for your health, bad for your mental health at least. we
Indeed.
know that law students experience higher rates of anxiety, depression, substance abuse than the general population. The same is true of lawyers.
It's true. Yeah,
And
especially young lawyers, actually.
yeah, uh, so UNM is providing a lot of really good resources for the students. I mean, we have a counselor on campus.
Mm.
There's a forthcoming wellness center with exercise equipment and a meditation area. Um, working on a social media initiative with links to well-being resources. And recently in the pandemic, we've started a student-led peer support group with the intent
wow.
of reducing stigma around feeling bad in law school. I mean, a lot of this has come as a result of the pandemic, so I recognize
Yeah.
that we're moving forward and having this great impetus, but I'm wondering, have you seen similar efforts at other schools where you've conducted research? You know, what are the advantages of taking of access to these resources, and how can law students benefit from this sort of thing?
So yes and yes. I have a lot to say about the structure of law school these days, so feel free to interrupt me. So first, I think the measures UNM is taking are fabulous. A special wellness center for law students, a counselor, peer support groups, these are all wonderful things and they really matter. And not every law school has them. So I commend UNM for caring, not just because it will make its law students happier in the short term, but because it will make its law students better lawyers. Right? Lawyers who are equipped not just to pass the bar, but to have sustainable, balanced, meaningful legal careers. I think it's really important. The second thing I will say will sound less rosy, which is that even though measures like the ones you list are fantastic, I don't see them as transformative. And the reason they're not likely to be transformative is that the way law school is structured is virtually guaranteed to induce stress. So things like brown bag wellness lunches and a peer support group, you know, are balms for that stress. They do not prevent the creation of that stress.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to prevent stress from being created, we need to, or to minimize it to the extent that we can, I think we need to rethink the structure of law school in a number of ways. One easy example is the typical one final at the end structure of classes, or maybe if you're lucky, one final and one midterm. You know, imagine if you worked at a company and your boss slapped a bunch of work on your desk and said, I'll check back in with you in 3 months, right? We would call that person a really bad boss, but that's what we do for law students. We know that people learn best, and this is especially true, by the way, for first-gen students. People learn best with pedagogies that incorporate guided practice. So this means that you have many low-stakes chances to try things out and to get better and to make mistakes and to be corrected. You know, just to give you one example, when I teach evidence, sure, I use a final, but I also use problem sets that I actually grade and give students feedback on. And the point of that is to show students something that's totally true in legal practice, which is that you can work harder and get better. If you get feedback, you can work hard, you can improve, and it gives you a sense of agency. And having a sense of agency about your own ability to get better makes you feel less stressed out. And I think there's a number of things we could do to restructure law school. You know, I think we could rethink cold calling. We could rethink how much sense it makes to put all the foundational classes in the first year. We could give people electives from the very start so they can begin engaging with subject matter that's meaningful to them right away. We could provide more clinical opportunities for WOWs. We could hire law professors who are skilled teachers instead of hiring people who have maybe never taught and simply hoping they will be good teachers, right? We could hire people into tenure track jobs who've researched and thought deeply about legal pedagogy. Anyway, so there are many things I think we could do to change law school as a structure, and I think it's long overdue. And I just also want to say, this is not about coddling students. A lot of the changes I'd recommend, I think, would actually make law school harder in various ways. But I think they would be transformative. And I think a school like UNM is actually the perfect place to do it. And I hope that law schools will turn in that direction. I think we'll see.
I mean, to your point on evidence, from personal experience, we had problem sets that helped me improve vastly throughout the semester.
That's
I
fantastic.
struggled a
I've never
bit.
heard.
Yes.
I've never heard of anyone else giving problem sets. That's awesome.
Yeah, so helpful.
And it
So
helped.
to all the evidence professors out there, that's great. And yeah, I couldn't agree more about engaging with other material early on, and having more of the bar classes later on during law school. That all of that seems great. I remember I read a study, I think it was during my first year, about cold calling, or I forget what the name of the study was, but it was so about how law students are some of the only graduate students that tend to do better when they are experiencing anxiety and depression, whereas the average med student does better when they're in a good mood. A law student can succeed out of fear, and
Which
I
doesn't
think
seem healthy, does it?
it doesn't seem healthy, but if you're so afraid of your professor's cold call that you prepare for hours beforehand, sure, you're probably going to do all right. And I think the other end of that study was that the catastrophizing mind does better on a law school exam, because you can imagine every possible end of a tort that could go
Yes.
wrong.
I think maybe you're thinking of John Monahan's study, or at least he's one of the authors on it, where, yeah, we learned that pessimists do better in law school, although worse than every other kind of grad school, because they can think of all the mean things people could do, or all the ways people could get around get around a law or something like that. I mean, another thing I think we do with law students that I don't see as necessary is just the way that we do the curve. Right, putting law students into
Sure.
direct competition with each other, so that my success is contingent on your lack of success. Very, very few other grad programs do that, and I think we've convinced ourselves that it's necessary, but I really don't think it is.
I agree, and definitely not my favorite part about law school is the competitive edge with your friends. I mean, I really would rather not have to do that, but for now, that's the way the system is. So.
Indeed.
All right, so finally, I want to talk to you about what it means to get through law school and receive a JD. I'm, of course, looking forward to giving myself that big pat on the back, and
Definitely, you'll deserve it.
getting through it. Thank you. But sometimes I wonder what being an attorney will be like if it's going to be something that I love. If of course, every job comes with things that are more difficult than others, but I wonder if I'm going to love being an attorney. And part of that comes from this notion that I've gained in law school about, there's got to be some right way to be an attorney. You have to be on a journal in law school, and then you have to clerk, and then you have to join big law and earn $1 million. And to be honest, what if that's not exactly what I want? What should I do? In other words, what does it mean to be a happy, or even a sort of happy lawyer?
Yeah, it's difficult, because so many people who are in law school got to law school by doing all the things that you're supposed to do for success, right? Getting good grades, or getting a good LSAT score, or participating in the right activities, or having the right internships, and keeping lots of options open. And the thing is, when you've gotten to where you are by doing all those things, it's very hard to change your frame of mind and sit and be like, oh, now I'm here and I get to decide what I want to do. It's time to make decisions. One of my absolute favorite people in the world, Pam Carlin, told me once, the point of life is not to die with as many options open as possible. And that's certainly true. And very often I tell law students, hey, you've made it. So this is the point where you get to decide what you want to do. And they kind of look at me like, what? Like, that's the frame of mind that got me here. And I think you're right that students tend to be plagued by the idea that there is a right way to do law school, or a right way to be a lawyer. There's this platonic ideal, and everything else is second best or third best. And so instead of trying to find their way to do law school, they're constantly trying to approximate this kind of elusive ideal. But the big secret, I think, the big take home in law school is that there is no right way to do law school. There's only your way. So your job in law school is way harder than quote unquote success. Your job in law school is to make yourself into the kind of lawyer and the kind of person you want to be after law school. And one of the really cool things about the practice of law is that there are so many ways to do it. You can do direct services. You can do, appellate advocacy. You can write appellate briefs. You can have a job where you have really regular hours or really irregular hours. You can, it may take some trying, but there are all kinds of, different types of subject matter with which you can work. And if you can find a path through law school and a path into law that's intrinsically meaningful for you, so not that looks good on paper or that impresses people, but that truly satisfies something at the core of you, you'll be a good part of the way to where you need to be. And that's really the reason I wrote the book, was to help law students and maybe lawyers figure out how to do exactly that.
Great. Yeah, well, Katie, I thank you so much for joining us today on Legal Wellbeing in Action.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, wish you the best.
Thanks.
And to everyone else out there.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's Wellbeing Committee and the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Gil Flores. The views of the presenters are that of their own and are not endorsed by the State Bar of New Mexico. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, or legal advice. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.